He would go to the swimming pool. I go set the pool up for him so he could lay out by the pool.
For years, Elvis's personal chef stayed quiet, keeping his secrets safe. But now, 48 years after his death, she finally speaks. Her words are full of truth, love, and pain. What did she see? And why did she wait so long to tell it all? Join us as we expose what Nancy Rook said about her moments with Elvis. The long-held secret. Nancy kept her lips sealed for years after Elvis passed away. It wasn't that she had no stories to share. Actually, she had plenty of them, but there were certain boundaries you just didn't dare to cross, especially in Memphis. Not when it involved someone like Elvis Presley, who had left a mark on so many hearts. People flew in from all around the globe just to stand outside the gates of Graceland. Nancy had watched fans cry as they spoke about him, as if they had lost someone close, like a sibling or lifelong friend. That kind of heartbreak was something Nancy understood deeply. She had spoken about it before, which was maybe why she eventually chose silence. Letting people wonder sometimes said more than actual words could. After Elvis was gone, Nancy continued working for his family. She played a part in turning Graceland from a home into a museum, a place for the public to remember him. Still, there was one area inside that mansion that remained mostly untouched, which was the upper floor where Elvis had his private space. Tourists never got to go there. The press didn't step foot inside. Even the regular staff stayed away from that part. It was as if everyone quietly agreed that those rooms were off-limits. Nancy mentioned that the bedroom and bathroom upstairs were only dusted once or twice a month, just enough to keep them from getting musty. When she went up there, she didn't talk or linger. She just did her job, then left. But every time she entered those rooms, something stirred inside her. Looking at the hallway, the floor, and that bathroom at the very end always brought back memories she couldn't forget. Each time she folded his clothes or wiped down a shelf, it reminded her of that morning that Elvis passed. She rarely spoke about it in public and never gave full details. But during the 1990s, Nancy did write a book called Inside Graceland. It was her way of telling the world about the Elvis she had known. Through lighthearted stories and warm reflections, she talked about his unusual eating habits, his love for music, and how he kept odd hours. Readers laughed and smiled through most of it. But when they reached the last part of the book, the part they'd been waiting for, something felt missing. She hadn't given the full picture, and though many were satisfied, those who really knew Nancy noticed something deeper hiding between the lines. In quiet moments during conversations, she would sometimes pause when certain things were brought up. Her eyes would drift, and she would go silent. Close friends remembered her saying that if people ever found out everything she knew, they'd never be able to listen to his songs the same way again. Though it wasn't said in anger, it felt more like a burden she carried, something too heavy to share out loud. As the years passed, more questions kept rising. Questions like, why was there so much confusion around the exact time of Elvis's death? Why were some of his pill bottles taken away before the police could even arrive? And even questions about his lab reports, which went through so many edits before the public got to see them. Apart from that, people questioned why his staff, especially Nancy, never said anything to the authorities. Truth is, Nancy had tried, but only in private. She never wanted attention. A few friends said she had told them parts of the story over time, asking them not to repeat it. She once mentioned that certain people in Elvis's inner circle didn't want the police checking that bathroom. There were things inside they didn't want to be found. And as for Ginger, Elvis's partner at the time, she was far too shaken to explain anything clearly. Nancy never needed to say much. Her silence held weight. Her actions, her expressions, even her pauses spoke volumes. And those who truly listened knew that there was more to the story than anyone had ever been told. Some people say there was a moment when Nancy was asked to clean things up before help arrived that day, though she never confirmed it herself. But as time passed, Nancy grew older, and with age came a kind of quiet struggle. It wasn't anger that she carried, it was the weight of years spent holding in what she knew. She remained loyal, but her heart began to feel heavier, especially when doctors later told her she had health issues. That news seemed to shift something deep inside her. Not long before she passed, about a year before her final days, Nancy opened up in a gentle, meaningful interview. She said she had done everything the Presley family asked of her. But now, before leaving this world, she felt that maybe it was time for the truth to come out. Her words weren't loud or harsh. They were calm and freeing, like someone taking a deep breath after holding it in for too long. Her book, the one where she shared so many sweet memories and light-hearted moments, had always been believed to be honest. But now people started to wonder, what if the most important part of her story was the one she didn't write down? What if the silence she carried all those years wasn't just about respect, but also about something she regretted? In the years following Elvis's death, Nancy's final comments started to sound different. They weren't just thoughtful, they had a quiet urgency, like she had something important left to say. Nancy had always been careful to protect Elvis's legacy. She told loving tales about him, little things about what he liked, how he lived, and what made him smile. But it started to seem like she had also chosen to hide certain details, probably to shield his image. Right before Nancy passed away, she made a small but powerful statement. She didn't hold a press conference or make a big announcement. That wasn't her style. But those closest to her noticed a change in her during her final months. She became more thoughtful and slowly began speaking more openly. Then, one day, she said something that took everyone by surprise, especially from a woman who had been so silent for more than 40 years. She said it was time to tell everything. At first, people weren't sure what she meant, but the way she said it made it clear that Nancy had decided to stop carrying the burden alone. It wasn't for fame or attention, it was because she wanted peace. She had always stood up for Elvis, always tried to show the world the sweet, real person he was. Through her stories, she brought fans closer to him, but she had never shared what she really believed about his final days. Nancy kept those thoughts to herself for a long time. Then someone close to her shared that she had quietly said Elvis had been doing worse than most people knew in the weeks before he passed. He was tired, not just physically, but deep down in his spirit. She had seen how worn out he looked. She said he seemed fed up, especially with the pills, the pressure, the whole act he had to keep up. Nancy also told this trusted friend something even more serious. She believed that Elvis had been given medications that weren't meant for him. Some of them came from people around him who didn't fully understand how much they were hurting him. Nancy said she kept seeing new pill bottles in the trash that summer, ones she hadn't seen before. She also noticed he'd sometimes fall asleep at odd times, right in the middle of a conversation, or during dinner, or even while talking. Back then, she thought he was just tired or overwhelmed with everything. But now, looking back, she feared it was something more dangerous. Then, Nancy spoke of something she had never shared publicly, not even in her book. She finally mentioned what happened right after Elvis was discovered, lying on that bathroom floor. Just keep watching to know more about what she said. What happened when Elvis passed? The moment Ginger Alden called from upstairs crying and saying something terrible had happened, Nancy didn't waste a second. She rushed up immediately, but nothing could have prepared her for what she saw next. Elvis lying flat on the floor, not moving. She froze, unable to speak. Then her instincts kicked in, and she hurried back down to inform the others. The group often called the Memphis Mafia. Before the ambulance even made it to Graceland, something happened that Nancy never fully explained. Someone, though she never mentioned his or her name, told her to straighten up the room a little. She didn't think twice about it back then. She wiped off a desk, picked up a towel, and quietly tidied some items. It all seemed harmless at the time, but in the years that followed, when the world started digging into what happened that day, asking about pills, time frames, and possible cover-ups, those small actions came back to her. Nancy later admitted to someone close that she had no idea what exactly she was hiding. She was simply doing what she had been asked. Yet, that morning stayed with her. The strange sounds she'd heard, quick footsteps, a fall, and the water Elvis had gulped before, kept flashing through her mind. At first, she pushed those thoughts away, trying to convince herself they didn't really matter. But something shifted in her final months. In private, Nancy shared one thing she had never included in her book, something so powerful that it changed the way people saw the whole story. According to her, Elvis didn't just drop dead that morning. His death wasn't sudden. It was something that had been slowly happening, and no one around him stepped in to stop it. That message alone weighed heavily. So, those who were closest to Nancy during her last days noticed a deep sadness in her. It wasn't guilt over something she had done, but sorrow over the things she had kept to herself. For decades, she had remained silent. But was her silence a way to protect Elvis? Or had she stayed quiet, to cover for the people who allowed things to spiral out of control? After her confession, people started talking again. Nancy Rooks, who had faithfully worked at Graceland for years, finally opened up about what really happened behind those famous gates. And the truth wasn't pretty. Not because Elvis was a bad man, but because the people around him may have failed him when he needed them the most. Nancy had seen too many warning signs that summer, signs she chose to ignore for a long time. What truly shook everyone was the fact that her truth didn't come out in some big headline. It didn't hit all at once. Instead, it spread quietly, the way she always moved around Graceland. But once her words started to circulate, they hit hard, because fans were a little bit divided. Some refused to believe anything that contradicted the image of Elvis they had clung to for years. To them, Nancy's earlier stories, sweet, loyal, and simple, were the only ones that mattered. They believed her book was a final, peaceful tribute. But now, it seemed the same woman was hinting that Elvis's final hours were more tragic than anyone had imagined. She may have helped clean the scene in a way that softened what first responders would see. Not because she meant to cover anything up, but because she simply followed instructions in a moment of chaos. That realization that someone who truly cared for Elvis may have unknowingly altered evidence struck a painful chord. Even after all these years, no one has ever given a full, clear explanation for his death. Yes, they called it a sudden heart attack, but questions still hang in the air. There were substances in his system. The ambulance wasn't called quickly. The lab reports that were shared with the public were never fully unedited. And with Nancy's quiet confession, everything started to feel uncertain again. Online forums lit up. Fans, reporters, and curious readers all began discussing the story once more. New questions were raised. Old theories resurfaced. And in the middle of it all stood Nancy's final message. Soft, personal, and heartbreakingly honest. She hadn't just served a legend, she had carried his secrets for decades. But at the very end, she couldn't carry them anymore. Those who had spent years studying Elvis's life and legacy quickly went back to look again at the events surrounding his final moments. Everyone wanted answers. What exactly had Nancy been asked to tidy up? What did she witness that morning? And why had she waited so many years to finally say something? The effects of Nancy's revelation. Some believed someone might have warned her to stay quiet, but others admired her courage. They felt that after a lifetime of shielding the Presley name, Nancy finally found the strength to be honest. And maybe, just maybe, being truthful and being respectful weren't enemies after all. It became clear to many fans that Elvis wasn't a superhuman being. He was flesh and blood. Even the strongest fall, some loudly, others without a sound, often with people nearby too afraid to do the right thing. The house where he once lived, filled with laughter and music, didn't stop or speak out. Graceland kept running like nothing had happened. The tours continued. The merchandise was still sold. But for those working behind the scenes, especially the ones who knew Nancy, something had changed. They said things didn't feel the same anymore. People now understood that the choices made back then weren't necessarily out of neglect, but out of deep love for a man they saw as part of their family. Nancy didn't go on any talk shows. She didn't sign book deals or try to profit from what she knew. Instead, she shared soft whispers with those she trusted, quiet truths that spread farther than any headline. She didn't point fingers. She didn't give names. Her words alone were enough to shake how people saw Elvis's end. Many had been there and even seen the warning signs, but no one stepped up. Nancy had spent her life staying in the background, speaking little. Yet now that she was gone, her message rang out with surprising power. What she left behind wasn't scandal, it was weight, quiet, heavy thoughts that followed people long after they heard them. She hadn't wanted to damage anyone's memory, not even Elvis's. In truth, she wanted to guard the man she knew behind the fame, the man who sang gospel softly in the kitchen and liked his bacon extra crispy. But even the gentlest lies can't hold forever. The truth eventually finds a way through. Nancy never said she had all the answers. She wasn't some investigator. She wasn't a nurse. She was a housekeeper, a cook, someone who witnessed more than she ever planned to. That's what gave her words meaning. They were simple, grounded in daily life, spoken by someone who had truly been there. And when she finally decided to speak, she wasn't trying to shame anyone. She just felt it was time. Because sometimes keeping quiet, even when you think it's kind, can still feel like betrayal. Nancy used to believe that silence was a way of honoring Elvis. But later, she began to see that real respect also means being honest. Before she passed, she gave the world a deeper, more complicated look at who Elvis was and what surrounded him. A world where pills were handed out far too easily. A world where people were too nervous to speak up, even when they knew something wasn't right. The loudest voices in the room often fell quiet when it mattered most. People who thought they understood everything about Elvis's final days suddenly had more to think about. Not because Nancy revealed a dramatic twist or secret, but because she showed what it's like to live with memories you didn't ask for. The pain of wishing you had spoken up when it counted, even if you weren't sure what was really going on at the time. Nancy's final message didn't try to rewrite Elvis's story. Instead, it reminded us that even heroes are human, and so are the people around them. Now, to understand everything better, let's take a step back to the activities in Elvis's home. How things were done in Graceland. Nancy Rooks never saw Elvis Presley as a famous star first. She saw him as a normal man. Their first meeting didn't happen on a stage or at some glamorous event. It happened in the kitchen, early in the morning, with Elvis still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes and asking if there was any bacon left. That was in 1967, the year Nancy got hired at Graceland to help with cooking and cleaning. But what started as a simple housekeeping job quickly turned into something much deeper. She didn't just work in the house, she became part of its rhythm, part of the heart of Elvis's everyday life. As time passed, Nancy became more than just staff. She became someone who saw the real Elvis. She witnessed everything: calm breakfasts, intense moments, and emotional outbursts that never made it to the public eye. Graceland wasn't just a mansion, it was a place overflowing with feelings. Some nights, Elvis would wander the halls long after midnight, lost in thought and saying very little. On other nights, the house would come alive with music. When that happened, Nancy would be in the kitchen with him, singing along to the gospel tunes he loved most. She'd have a dish towel in one hand and a pan in the other, joining in on songs like "How Great Thou Art." He would grin at her when she sang, happy just to have someone share the moment. To the world, he was the king of rock and roll. But to Nancy, he was just Mr. Elvis. Probably because he was always polite and always said please and thank you. She never forgot that and used to say he was raised with good manners. Even when life at Graceland got wild, when phones never stopped ringing and visitors were coming in and out all the time, Elvis and the people around him never treated her badly. They respected her, no matter how busy or loud things got. Still, life at Graceland wasn't calm. Elvis kept strange hours, and when his schedule changed, so did Nancy's. If he woke up at 3 a.m. and asked for food, maybe bacon, biscuits, or sweet potato pie, Nancy was there, apron on, and always ready to cook. She didn't just tidy up, she helped him get dressed, laid out his outfits, organized his personal things, set up the pool area, and adjusted to a world where there was no real difference between day and night. It was a life that didn't follow the rules most people live by, But Nancy never once complained. She just did what needed to be done, and in the process, she saw more than most people ever would. Years later, she wrote about her time at Graceland in a book called Inside Graceland. But it wasn't a tell-all. It wasn't full of scandal or finger-pointing. It was warm, soft, and full of heartfelt memories. She shared funny stories, tender moments, and the little things that made Elvis who he was behind the spotlight. But even then, she didn't reveal everything. There were things she kept to herself, things she only shared in private with people she trusted. She said she held those things back, not out of fear, but out of care. She wanted to protect the man she'd come to know so well. Even so, people who adored Elvis hung on every word Nancy shared. They were fascinated. They wanted to know what he liked to wear, what meals made him smile, and how he acted when no one was filming. Nancy gave them pieces of that puzzle, but always gently, always with love. She never tried to shock or surprise anyone. She just told the truth the way she lived it, simple, kind, and filled with quiet beauty. Nancy had a way of sharing just enough to keep fans curious, but never too much to harm the image of the man she cared about. She often recalled how tidy he was, always making sure he smelled fresh, sometimes showering more than once a day. She never forgot how he liked his breakfast either. Crispy bacon and softly scrambled eggs made just the way he liked. She remembered how his eyes would move around the room like he was trying to find something that couldn't be seen, something he couldn't quite put into words. But what Nancy gave to the world wasn't just little pieces of his habits. It was something much bigger. She gave people a new way of seeing him. Through her memories, Elvis wasn't just a famous face or a tragic story people talked about. He became a real man again, someone who cried sometimes, who laughed loudly, who enjoyed food a little too much, and who liked to be alone when life got too heavy. He was someone who stayed close only to a few people he truly trusted, and Nancy was one of those rare people in his circle. She never tried to be in the spotlight, but as she grew older, she slowly began to let more of her truth come out. She hinted that there were still things left untold, secrets she had kept locked away for years. Those who had known her for a long time started to wonder what she had really seen and what she had chosen to keep to herself. As her life neared its end, Nancy spoke like someone who had made peace with the idea of sharing everything. She began to say that maybe the time had come. While we already know what happened after his death, let's explore the moments before he passed. Few moments before his death, that August morning in 1977 seemed just like any other day. Elvis had stayed up through the night, as he often did. In the very early hours of August 16th, he had been playing racquetball with his fiancée, Ginger Alden, and his cousin Billy. Nancy was already busy in the kitchen when Elvis came back inside. He looked worn out, but as always, he greeted her kindly and with respect. Like many other times, she offered to fix him something to eat. He politely turned it down, saying he wasn't hungry, just really sleepy, but he did ask for a glass of water. Nancy didn't think too much of it. It was a warm night, and he had been active. Another housemaid named Pauline was the one who took the water to him. It was in a pitcher, the kind that reminded you of old juice jugs with a handle. It seemed like nothing unusual, just another quiet moment in a house full of them. But Pauline noticed something strange. Elvis didn't just sip the water. He grabbed it fast and gulped it down like he had never been that thirsty before. Pauline thought it was odd. Nancy, on the other hand, just thought he was probably worn out from the game. Still, something about that morning stayed with her, tucked away in her memory. Around 9:30, she heard a heavy sound from upstairs. It wasn't loud enough to be called a crash, but it made her stop for a second. She paused and listened closely. No one screamed, no one shouted for help. There were no rushing footsteps, only silence. The kind of silence that your mind tells you to ignore. So she brushed it off and went back to work. Hours passed. Then around 1:50 in the afternoon, the phone rang. Nancy answered. Ginger was on the other end, and her voice trembled. She asked who was downstairs, her tone filled with fear. Nancy could hear the panic and asked what was going on. Ginger didn't answer right away. Instead, she broke down crying. That was the moment Nancy knew something terrible had happened. It wasn't a broken vase or a simple accident. It was something far worse, something big. The moment Nancy put the phone down, she rushed upstairs with her heart pounding faster at every step. She ran through the hallway and into the dressing room, and there, in the bathroom, she saw something that made her chest tighten. Elvis was lying face down on the floor, completely still. In a soft, stunned voice, she whispered to herself, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She didn't scream or freeze in fear, she just moved. As she turned back and hurried downstairs, a few of Elvis's close friends, those known as the Memphis Mafia, were already waiting. It was clear that everyone needed to be told, and fast. But as reality started sinking in, confusion and panic began to spread through the house like a wave. The next step was to call for medical help. While many around her started to feel overwhelmed, Nancy kept calm. When the paramedics finally arrived, they were completely unfamiliar with the layout of Graceland. They didn't know where to go or how to get to the right room. It was Nancy who stepped in, guiding them through the large house. She showed them the turns and narrow halls, helping them carry the stretcher up the winding stairs. Without her, they might have wasted precious time. She saw Elvis once more as they reached him. She later described him as looking like he had just fallen asleep, but deep down, she knew he was already gone. His skin had started to change color, small bluish marks appearing on his face. Still, everything that followed happened quickly. Sirens echoed outside, people rushed around, and camera crews and reporters began to gather. The world had just lost Elvis Presley. But for Nancy, it wasn't about the legend. She had lost the man she simply called Mr. Elvis, the same man who once chuckled while asking her to fix a rip in his pants. While everyone else told the story to the media, Nancy stayed in the background. The official word was that he had died from a heart issue. Nothing more, nothing less. But in her heart, Nancy knew there were still pieces of the puzzle that didn't sit right. There were whispers about medicine bottles, about what really took place in those quiet hours, beginning with that cold jug of water and ending with her finding him on the floor. At that moment, she chose silence. She let the investigators handle things and didn't speak up. Yet, as the years went by, she often found herself thinking back to that morning. Something inside her had shifted. This time, she wasn't going to hold back. She started to open up about her thoughts, the feelings she had kept hidden, and even the guilt she might not have realized she was carrying all these years. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.